Welcome, my dear friends. It's great to see you again. I'm Stephen Clements, a writer, a gamer, and an appreciator of big brain activities in general. On this channel, I perform dramatic story readings, I provide role-playing game and movie reviews, and I get to talk to interesting people, and I show off my adorable pets too. Sugar Biscuit. People seem to really like me admonishing Sugar Biscuit over allegedly licking a plate. In this episode, we're going to continue talking to an interesting person because we are in the next installment of the Ernest Gary Gygax Jr. or Ernie Gygax Oral History Series. In this episode, Ernie is still a wee lad, leaving the Brown house, moving to the Center Street house. He gets introduced to schooling, and there's a lot more religious violence than I was expecting in that regard, but it's there. Such is the life of an adventurer. And there's a lot of lessons that get learned the hard way, usually at the receiving end of a switch held by his mom. But some of us come from the school of hard knocks. I enjoyed it. Hope you do too. And on with the show. We're leaving Center Street House. Now where are we going?
I want to just add a little bit into the Center Street house because I don't believe that I talked about the TV that they put in the basement and gutted. Tom Rash, John Cohn, and my dad all were, at that time, they were imbibers of something that wasn't so popular, unlike now. So they would go to the basement and they took this TV, they gutted it and put all these holes in like construction paper and put different kinds of lights going around and around on a track so that they had their own star landscapes. They could sit and stare at that kind of stuff as they smoked their bowls. They had a phonograph and they started listening to Firesign Theater, which is fantastic stuff. So my mom, of course, hated that kind of thing, thinking that he was going to be a bad example and ruin the children. She finally made enough of a stink that he stopped having anybody over to the house and probably cut back on his fun greatly.
That sounds like a pretty cool setup.
Yeah, I guess that was kind of neat. And of course, I was awed by it and would turn it on when there was nobody around just to see the different colored lights and things come through. That was neat. I'm just trying to think of finishing off the Brown house. Mom had, of course, a garden, and that was the early start of her getting into huge gardens later. When she babysat Craig, I went to school, and Craig West, the fellow that I hit with the brick, had gone to kindergarten for 4 years in a row before they finally sent him off to special school. The doctor didn't come over to the house. Mom clarified it and said she called the doctor, and the doctor said, "Don't worry, there's really no harm you can do to that boy." So I just wanted to get my story straight a bit. So then we just had gotten a piano from my cousin Hugh. He got it the best he could. He was an organ and piano repair and builder, as well as running clocks for churches and those giant, mechanical things. He gave us this piano and we pushed it, or I should say we, mostly as royalty. But as a little kid, I was beside everything and maybe carrying a small basket or something because 330 Center Street was exactly 1 block away across the street and kitty corner from where we used to live. There was no vehicle when it came to moving. Everything was hand-carted by us and friends of my dad's and mom's. So that was kind of an interesting thing, pushing a piano down the street. And it wasn't so big then. As Lake Geneva now, there'd be almost impossible because there'd be so many cars and things in parking spots. But in those days, it was a lot easier. And the city probably only had about 4,500 people. Now it probably has about 9,000. But we always were a tourist place, but they've really succeeded in bringing in just huge crowds nowadays, just packing them in. So that's the kind of start to us going to 330 Center Street. Now, 330 Center Street was no longer a single-story cottage. It was a modest 2-story home. I don't know if you've seen it, but of course, we'll provide a picture of it, though I don't think we have any pictures of it in the old days. In the old days, it had a nice hedgerow of bushes off the outdoor screen porch, which then would become a stormed, glassed-in porch in the wintertime. And the front entryway had stairs coming up both sides, which it still does. But it had this huge evergreenish set of 2 trees and a large spread-out bush. And besides having the soft evergreen needles, they had red berries that were supposedly poison that only the birds, though, enjoyed. So, we had lots of robins and things there. It was a beautiful spot. Some of the childhood memories there are Dad having to put in a cement stair piece or 2 and also putting a new part of the sidewalk down. And I don't know why that was his responsibility. I thought it's public, but anyway, and we all got to put like our handprints in it. These are the sorts of things that children remember. In those
Now, is
days,
that stretch of hand-printed sidewalk still there, or has it been replaced since then?
I don't know. It's something to take a look at. But I know that the steps themselves have been replaced a little bit. It's very possible that that could be gone now. Also, we used to be able to, we used to, it was a horrible thing. Had to rake leaves and all that. Yeah, it's just a horrible thing. And at least
Child
in those
labor.
there was a reward involved because the reward was we'd put them all out in the street and then we get to play in the leaf piles. And then later on, Dad would get us marshmallows as we set fire to them. We'd all do roasted marshmallows in the evening so we could enjoy seeing a fire. That was all kind
So
of,
y'all used to take all the flammable leaves, put them in the street, and then set them on fire in the middle of the street.
in the parking space, kind of.
Oh,
It
okay,
was,
gotcha.
yeah, it's not in the middle of the street. No, and we played in it too, which is something that now would be probably thought of as horrible. That, oh my God, these kids are in the street, throwing leaves in the air and all that sort of thing.
It was a
Because
different age, like you said. Nowadays, even Lake Geneva, tiny Lake Geneva, would be too busy for you to do that. But back in the day, totally doable.
yeah, they don't even allow leaf burning. The home that my mother lives in now does allow that in Lyons. It's surrounded by Lake Geneva, this part of Lyons, but they've always voted not to bring it into the city because that way our taxes are so much lower. We don't have street lights and we don't have sidewalks. So it's very comfortable. I've got a 0.6 acre, 2-lot place with a cottage. That's very fine for my mom and her kitties. At this point, mom is very young. She's only maybe 26, 27, 28, somewhere there when we're moving across the street. We're only a block away from the National Food Store, which is long gone. At that time, I don't know if I had already brought up, but a friend of mine, Bill Williams, took me into the grocery store. We asked our parents and they gave us each enough money to get a candy bar. And then he showed me how to stuff 5 others into my pants, just like he did. So,
No, bad.
so with that response, I go home and brag to my mother, saying, look at this. This is a marvelous concept. My new friend Bill has shown me how to get lots of candy without having to pay for most of it. She grabbed a switch off the lilac tree and took me by the ear down to the National Food Store and asked to see the manager in his office. And she beat me in front of the manager on my butt. And they made it so that I couldn't come back for a whole month. And I was always embarrassed because I thought that they were all watching me. And I never stole again in my whole life. That traumatized me so much. I was a shy lad. So that's my great theft story.
The greatest heist that Ernie Gygax Jr. ever pulled off and didn't get away with. Well, good. You learn to be honest. And
Yes.
pain is a great teacher.
Well, not only that, but much more than just pain. I didn't like to be noticed. I was a real shy lad. The whole concept of then being shown in a spotlight and especially in a negative view. And at some point, she was able to drill into my head, well, what if somebody came in and stole your tricycle or whatever? And then it's like, well, that would be horrible. And she established the idea that thieving is stealing from somebody else rather than just finding a treasure out in the middle of nowhere. So that was a fine lesson.
Becoming a better person through shame. Got it. Yeah, that's good. Well, when your friend broke your toy, you let him know you did not approve of that.
We were babysitting him, so I don't really even think he was a friend.
Oh, okay.
Though I did in kindergarten, I remember I really hated going to school. That's what I didn't tell them, the school story. But the very first day I went to kindergarten, mom was walking me. I was a mom's boy completely because I went into a lady store with her, which was just horribly boring, filled with middle-aged ladies and a few older ladies. And as they were starting to pat me on the head, oh, what a lovely child. I then pulled up mom's dress and went in between her legs and hid under her dress, at like 3 years old, whatever. So that gives you an idea just how much I didn't want to be in the spotlight. And at 5 years old, she's walking me to the school and they pulled me up to Eastview and I'm looking there and there's all these kids in here. And Lisa's on her other hand walking along. And then all of a sudden she says, okay, Ern. And she opens up the door and go on in. And I go, what? Just go on in. This is where you're going to go every day. And then she has to push me in against my will, and all the other kids are watching, of course. And then I'm pounding on the door, and she's holding it closed, and all this, and I'm crying, and mom's crying back. I was her first, and thereby I was a big mama's boy, big wee wee boy. So then at that point, when she left, and I knew I was doomed around all these other strangers, I went and hid in the coat rack, because they had the little coat rack there with all these coats, and it was early fall, and I just had made the cutoff, so I was one of the youngest kids.
Oh no, that's not good.
I still remember Andy Gorman was this fellow's name. I don't remember his face at all, but he's the guy that found me underneath the coats, pointed me out, and said, ah. And then I remember that same day, was hiding underneath the teacher's desk. I looked at that desk later, and it was just so small. And her name was Miss Linden. And next year, she became Mrs. Lund. So somehow my attitude about her had changed, because by the time she became Mrs. Lund, I was kind of sad to see Miss Linden no longer available or whatever. Of course, at 5, there's absolutely no hormones. It's all just attachments with time and everything. So that was kindergarten. I didn't do very well. And I watched that same gentleman, Craig West, that I'd hit with a brick. And we had to paint supposedly some sheep. So they gave us all these different crayons, and we would also get paste to be able to. And I watched him and I said, great idea. So rather than painting between the lines and trying different colors, I just took like a big black crayon and a red crayon and scribbled all over it. And then he thought, uh-oh, that was the start of them thinking that maybe there's something wrong with me. And I couldn't tie my own shoes, even though they had this old Mother Hubbard shoe thing with, these little faces and things that with a big shoe for us to learn how to tie. But the little girls had to tie my shoes for me when it would come to that. And in those days, we had a mat that we would all have to take at least a 10 or a 15-minute rest and lay down. The teacher would sit at her desk. And that was after we all got our milk. It started, you only got white milk unless your parents wrote in that you could have chocolate. So that was an early thing that I remember getting, the ability to have chocolate milk. I think it cost like a nickel or something. And my family was getting pretty tight at the time. So all those kinds of things became a little harder. But I went from that to first grade. And in first grade, Mrs. McClernand was a very, very patriotic lady who I've got to meet several times since then. And as a Jehovah's Witness, we weren't allowed to participate in all the holidays except for Thanksgiving, and also not to stand up and pledge allegiance to the flag. So when everybody else would get up, I was sitting at my desk, and she came up to me and said, young man, stand and blah, blah, blah. And I said, I can't. It's against my religion. And she slapped me across the face and said, show deference to your flag. And I slapped her right back from my seat. So off to the principal's office I went. The principal, of course, didn't have the story the same way. So I had to go home and was stuck to the couch or something in some sort of timeout kind of thing, with probably a little whipping from the lilac tree. They would make us pick our own lilac switch. If it wasn't good enough, you have to go out and get a new one kind of thing. Always on the butt. And then a bunch of the kids showed up after school, and they came running up and said, Ernie, how are you? And all this. And mom says, he can't visit with you. It's such and such. He slapped the teacher. And one of the other kids said, well, yeah, but she slapped him first. Then suddenly my folks went down and she denied it and all that. And years later, she still doesn't remember that occasion.
So the question of who shot first in Star Wars is, with Ernie, it's who slapped first.
Yes, I wasn't cowed enough. I already had that attitude of, strike back immediately. I didn't even think. So that probably goes on to show some of my actions in the far future.
That makes you probably the youngest person that I've heard of taking a stand, a real defensive stand in support of their religious liberty. So good on young Ernie. That's right.
Well, it's something that mom ingrained in us. She wouldn't let me play war. So later on, when I started to do that, around 2nd or 3rd grade a little bit, I had to sneak it, because if I got caught, I was again brought home and couldn't play for the rest of the day. It was like all this horrible stuff. So by the time that got through, at the end of 1st grade, there was one time they thought maybe there was something wrong with me. They thought maybe I had Down syndrome, just like this Craig, because I didn't care. I hated school, and there's no reason to do anything these fuckers, these people want me to do. So
why would you? To that point, you were kind of a wild puppo. You didn't know why this was important, and you didn't want it. And you didn't
Nope.
want it. That's a
I
very
hated
honest
it.
child thing to do.
I remember going to first grade and my mom had galoshes for me, which are these rubber boots, and would have me have a scarf. So I would take those off and just go with my shoes and get those soaking wet. I'd whip the scarf off because it choked me and all that. So I'd stick those underneath the side porch at 330 Center Street, then go to school. But one day when I still had them on, it was really cold and mom was only in a robe. And I laid out in our yard and I started making snow angels instead of going to school. She says, "Go to school right now." And I said, "I'm not going to school. You can't make me." So as I'm making snow angels, and she comes out with a broom in her hand and she chased me over a block towards the school. And I finally ended up going to school, which was another block and a half away, rather than go back and go through all this again. So this is where establishing a little bit of a having my own ideas and things, I basically believe, and not always conforming to what you're supposed to do. You know, later on, Elisa did some of the same thing, but it was many years later, by going out the way mom wanted her to go to school. And then she had hidden makeup she'd whip on, you know, to somehow stand out and not be different from the other young girls. They were all trying to be much more mature. That was very important to the young ladies. It was either first or second grade. I think it was the end of first. My folks went ahead and let me pass, but it was a question. They could have held me back. So in second grade, when it's a different Mrs. McLurden, believe it or not, this lady said, "Well, he doesn't seem to have anything wrong with him." The principal of the school, he had just been a fifth grade teacher, Mr. Hollis Herbison, took me into the little gymnasium and he had a table set up and he sat on one side and I sat on the other. And then he had a competitive game where we were going to figure out who was smarter and be able to do this IQ test. And then he would compare his sheet with mine. So then it became something fun and I scored in the top 4%. There I was doomed, though, to no longer getting away with lazy, naughty trends. And my mom then asked if she could get the highest grade reading material since I was in the idiot low class. And within 2 weeks, I was saying things right rather than it was bada, fada. And they also got me a speech teacher. She'd give me a whack. And I learned the very first big word I learned was kettle within that 2 weeks, you know, Kettle. That was because I was going ta ha ha for the and all this. I really had no interest in doing what I was told. But at that point, suddenly I found out that, oh, well, the jig's up.
So when
At
you
one
got
point,
challenged more, you got more interested?
well, I wasn't so much interested as that I was now couldn't just hide because I was threatened with corporal punishment if I didn't perform and get my grade levels where they should be. And they
It
were
has
always
its uses.
so I know there was this one girl, Mary Beth Jacobson, who was in kindergarten and first grade, was one of the two top obvious students that just couldn't do anything wrong. Just a little well-dressed little lady. So I got a position where I could see her paper. So I was just copying her paper. And then when the papers came back, she started crying because she'd gotten her first thing wrong, which I'd also gotten that one wrong. And then at some point, I figured out after a while, well, that doesn't really work because there's bound to be more errors and things. Maybe I could figure out how to do some of this myself. And then third grade, the teacher had a son in class, but her son had a different name than she did. So that's how we got presented with the first concept of divorce and remarrying and still having a family, because that wasn't big in that era and time. This is the 1960s. I think I went to kindergarten around 1965. I remember Kennedy dying at home. There was all these, I guess it's not celebration, but on the black and white TV, there was all these guys in what I called fish hats. They were the bishops, you know, because he was a Catholic and all that. So that was very interesting. So again, school was very formative in many ways, but I'm starting to find out that I'm not super athletically inclined, but I am up there with the intelligent people, but I do not have the drive they have to achieve, perform, and to, you know, try to be that top tier. So instead, I start developing the concept that I will try to do the least amount of work and get the best results possible out of that so I can then go have fun.
Yeah,
and
that's my philosophy. So we agree.
So that's how that worked. And second grade, there was something else that, in second grade, there was a first grade student that was even more nerdy than I was. His name was Ralph Williams, but he wanted to be called Skip. And Skip
Wait
Williams.
a second. The Skip Williams.
Oh, yeah. Yes,
Ralph.
so
Okay.
yeah, Ralph. So when it was playground time and he was sitting off by himself with his little glasses and his runny nose, I went up and I started going around him doing a circle saying, Skippy peanut butter, Skippy peanut butter. Before you know it, all the other kids joined in. So we started having this huge ring around the Rosie of this poor little boy that didn't want to be going. And he got so upset that he puked. And to this day, he says that's one of his most traumatic experiences. and,
All
and I'm
thanks to you.
bastard.
Wow. Are y'all friends, by the way? Or is that like forever he swore you off?
No. By the time we were in early high school, Ralph had access to his dad's stash of porno magazines. And also, if I would kick in some money, we'd go down by his ham radio set, and somebody would give us a half gallon or a gallon jug of all the remainders from a bar. I don't know if it was, and we would pay $3 for that. And we'd sit, look at these magazines, and get a little buzz going. So I'm just right in the basement. True
That's as
nerd.
good a life as a young lad could hope for. That's good. Yeah.
And we also were able to get a buzz off of things that, that had been watered down with ice and who knows. And the mixture, of course, was just awful.
But where there's a will, there's a way. See, you did have drive. It just wasn't for school. You wanted the things you're interested in, which was getting screwed up and women. So, yeah.
Early on, though, in about fourth grade, maybe even fifth, we'd play Foursquare and other games outside the school before it was time to come in. And one of the other lads had brought a couple Playboys, but he stuck them underneath the trash barrel close by. So at that point, we all knew what, and so we'd sneak out there once in a while and look. Without hormones, it really, all I could see was, yeah, they're sure are different and strange.
This is a good point you're bringing up about young men and motivation. And back in the day, we had to earn it. If we wanted to see a woman in any stage of undress, we had to come up with plans. We had to do schemes. We had to put in the work to see it. Whereas now, the poor lads, they're just
we had to look
with it.
For curse words and for fornication and all these other words, just to try to whoa, and of course that occupied a great deal of my attention, and I'm sure many other lads too, trying to find the things that we're not supposed to see and do.
Yep.
The same thing that Iran gained us so many D&D fans in 1980 when they thought the kid was in the steam tunnels. It was you can't do this. This could be dangerous.
That makes you want to do it more, right?
Yeah. Or at least investigate it.
Yep.
And see if it's worth doing. In fifth grade, there was this old Mrs. Borschke, I think was her name. She had come back to school after being retired because our teacher, I think, was going to have a baby. She was wonderful, though. She was grandmotherly-like. That was just fantastic. I did well by her. And then I had one class with Miss Diane. And what was cool about that is that even though I didn't really care for that class so much, when she heard my name in front of all the other students and everything, she says, "Oh, Ernie, that's the name of my first college boyfriend." And so I became like the teacher's pet with her for that one class. And so she was pretty. She was a redhead. And I enjoyed that attention. I played on the back.
That's the attention you wanted, right? Not the other attention, that kind of attention.
Mom was also very, very gorgeous. I remember in kindergarten, one of the gals who had seen my mom coming into school with me said, "Oh, is that your sister?" And I said, "No, that's my mama." Okay. I was very proud. And I thought, most other people's moms were kind of because my mom was, the grocery store guys, there'd be all these people that were always saying, "Oh, Mary Jo, if you ever need any help or anything," they were all hitting on her a little bit softly, even with strollers and kids all over the place. Because then Heidi happened 5 years after I was around. So
okay.
Another story is baby Heidi was crying in her crib at 330 Center Street. So my mom was busy outside and Dad was probably at work. Then I tried to get Heidi out of the crib, and I did. And I started bringing her to the front door and said, "Mama, Mama, the baby's crying." But then I was holding her upside down by her ankles. And she says, "No, honey, please don't pick up the baby. Just come and tell me." So I didn't get chastised too much about that, except that I shouldn't, pick up
You
the
tried
baby.
to help.
And later on, just as a side thing, once dropped Luke out of his cradle by accident. Oops, baby fell down. So she was very jealous of Luke stealing the attention in 1970. There's still plenty more 330 Center Street.
Yeah, so I think young Ernie was well justified in standing up for himself and his religion in the face of an overreaching authoritarian teacher, but more people should actually take stands against the bullies who are knocking him around, regardless of what their social position is. And I gotta say, I can relate to Ernie's first noticing of women, and they're pretty cool. I know some dudes out there hate them, but me, I'm a pretty big fan, especially of this one. Just like Ernie's a fan of this one. So my dear friends, I hope you enjoyed that installment of Ernie's Oral History series. If you did, remember to like and subscribe and comment with what you thought, how you related to this episode. I'd be interested to hear what you have to say. And if you got any questions for Ernie, put them down there too. I'll ask him. I might be able to get you an answer. And remember to share this around, because the more history that we can hold on to and that we can spread around, the more we'll remember the past. And so, my dear friends, as we part for now, I wish you nothing but the best.